Thank you very much. I appreciate it.
Good afternoon, everyone. Hi. My name is Emily Hockaday. I'm the Senior Managing Editor for Asimov Science Fiction Magazine and Analog Science Fiction and Fact. I think there are still magazines over here, so please feel free to grab one of each to take home and share. I'm really excited to be here today with 4 of our amazing authors, some featured in Analog, some in Asimov's, and some both. So I have with me Sarah Pinsker, Sakinah Hoefler, Mercurio D. Rivera, and Matthew Kressel. I have longer intros for them, and I'll read them before their individual readings. So what we're going to do is each of the authors is going to read all of or a portion of a short story from the magazines. And then after that, I have some questions about writing and about generative AI and regular AI, the different AIs. And we'll open it up to questions from the audience as well. So we are going to start with Sakinah Hoefler. Sakinah is a fiction writer, poet, and playwright. She's a proud recipient of the 2023 Analog Award for Emerging Black Voices. Her work has been published both domestically and internationally, and her plays have been produced by places such as Cincinnati Playhouse in the Park and the University of Cincinnati's College Conservatory of Music. A former chemical engineer for the United States Department of Defense, she currently teaches writing at Princeton University. She resides in Newark, New Jersey with her wonderful husband and adorable son.
I'm bad with technology, surprisingly. And I just want to thank Trevor and Emily so much for your guidance this year. It has been a wonderful experience being an emerging Black voice. I know I had to pass the mic to the next person, but it's been a great year with you guys, so I really appreciate it. All right, and I think the only thing you should know about this story is that ever since I was a kid, I always had this fear that I would wake up one day and my family wouldn't recognize me. And this story's coming out in the next issue of Analog. Second chance. I never found the other Toya. When they aroused me, I was greeted by a room full of somber doctors, nurses, and consciousness tech CNTs, including the CNT who had downloaded my consciousness into the wrong body. They couldn't tell me how it happened, HIPAA and all, but from a doublespeak and apologies, I gathered there were 2 Toya Smiths with similar identities, birthdays, weights, and heights, whose consciousnesses both wound up at the same second chance facility. I don't know what the other Toya originally looked like, whether she was one of the wealthy who downloaded their consciousness into younger bodies for an extended life, one of the influencers who crowdsourced funds from their rapture audiences and live streamed their journeys of becoming someone else, or someone like me who had been racing home to set up for a birthday party, got pulled over for speeding, and got shot for reaching for the one ID that had rolled beneath the seat. While I recovered, my husband assured me during our video-less chats that despite the limited inventory of available bodies in the base-level database at the closest second chance facility, he found one that resembled the original me. He begged me to turn on the camera to see how badly they messed up. I refused. I wasn't ready for him to see what glared at me in my reflection. I could barely describe to him how it felt. Foreign. Like when a dentist sticks a needle in your mouth to numb your gums and teeth, yet your tongue is the worst off. Heavy, swollen, uncontrolled, unfamiliar, and you spend half of the afternoon trying not to bite it off. This foreignness commandeers the body, lasts for days. You have to tell your brain, those are your toes wiggling. You have to concentrate to connect holding a fork with the sensation that your hand is the one holding the fork. You have to stumble to the bathroom on smaller feet, understand new dimensions, a new eye level, 20/20 non-corrected vision. With each touch, you have to remind yourself, these are my eyeballs, this is my nose, these are my ears, this is my vagina. On the fourth day, like the doctor's promise, the unfamiliar became familiar. I felt like me, my stomach, my hands, my fingernails. The organs, whether preserved or manufactured, worked, functioned, thrived. My bladder, my heart. As I walked through the hallways in rehab wing on balanced feet, I searched for faces that resembled my old one. My smile, my haircut, someone who looked as confused as I felt. This other Toya. No luck. The CNT who made the error visited me to tell me doctors used to leave scalpels and scissors in patients by mistake in the 20th century. Mistakes, he said, are not intentional. I told him to get the fuck out of my room. When I was allowed outside visitors, my husband did a full stop at the door and cursed, something we always agreed we never do in front of our daughters, the ones who were clinging to his hands at that very moment. When I opened my arms for them and said, "I am your mother," they didn't run into them. Jasmine dropped the bouquet lily she'd been holding. My husband, all 6'3" of him, crumpled into the visitor's chair and started to cry. My girls started crying. I started crying. When the attending doctor had the nerve to enter the room and ask, "What's wrong with you all?" Maya looked him in the eye and said, "My mommy was black. This woman is white." "We don't talk like that anymore," the doctor said. "Your mommy is right here." He looked like the type of man who did 4,000 push-ups every day and spearfished endangered sea life on weekends. "Your mommy is still your mommy. She just looks a little different." Maya, my lion, glared at him. "This is very different, doctor." Very different indeed. When we got home, things shifted. Maya and Jasmine started to put themselves to bed. Maya reading bedtime stories to 3-year-old Jasmine, Maya tucking Jasmine into bed before climbing into her own. Maya getting Jasmine ready for school, Maya helping Jasmine floss and brush her teeth. My husband spent long hours reaching out to tech human rights lawyers, ones he knew and ones he found on the search. They all looked at the contract he signed and told him the same thing: no. The recent Supreme Court ruling in Second Chance's favor made it very difficult to sue. One lawyer told him I was fortunate. A quick-thinking EMT had uploaded my consciousness to the cloud when it reached my original body. Still, the cloud has storage space limitations. My husband had a little under 2 hours to make a decision before my consciousness would be overwritten, at which point there would be no second chance. Later, he told me he had not read the contract. He had a choice: to let my consciousness be overwritten, in essence, to let me die, and receive a $3.25 million payout from the Victims of Police Shootings Act, or a chance to continue my life by downloading my consciousness from the cloud into an available body. In the ironclad 68-page contract, there was a clause absolving Second Chance from any liability for, quote, consciousness download aggression, including, but not limited to, the rare occasion of an improper destination download. Another lawyer, a college friend, told him he had lucked out. The current market rate for base level bodies was $10 million. His friend's husband badly needed a new, muscular, cancer-free body. Before the shooting, my husband and I were your typical next-gen adults, still attracted to each other couple, having sex about once a month and on special occasions. Now, there was no sex, no touching. Now, we lie next to each other and pretend to sleep. The other night, he asked me if I would go underground for a third encounter. He knew the cost and the risk. Once you take a second body, a second consciousness, your synapses links with the snippets of the former owner's memory. I know the woman who owned this body died of a shooting too. I know because when I do sleep, I dream. I dream of insects, the sour scent of Sharpie highlighters, clickers, bangs that go closer and closer. My original body had been killed with one bullet, no warning. The doctors told me the bullet clipped a major artery in my neck, that my consciousness was uploaded before my body bled out. I remember only a thunderclap and fire licking my neck, a sizzle. There was no buildup, no nails digging into a desk, no stifled breathing, no children whimpering, no waiting. The sound of a relic car double backfiring sends me diving behind the sofa. There are 2 half-inch ring-shaped mottled scars on the chest of this body. Researchers have found that even A successfully completed third encounter leads to a 58% increase in the likelihood of an attempted suicide. Too many memories of death, too much loss. How could you ask me that? I was just thinking that's something the other Toya might have done, he says, because, I thought you did this so that I could live. Of course, he said. I was just thinking of solutions. My daughter's quizzed me. When is Jasmine's birthday? Do I remember the time we went to Sesame Place and couldn't find the right tram? Do I still like Indian food? The last one, I deflect. My tongue now prefers mild butter chicken over curry goat, basmati over garlic naan. Regardless, they slowly begin to accept me as their mother. They still don't hug me. They still don't touch me. They still don't let me read to them at night or tuck them into bed. But the other day, Maya told me, I love you. I love you too, I told her, and took a step towards her. She stepped back and crossed her arms. Did you ever look? For what? I knew what she meant. I avoid all mirrors, even windows, the pool, anything with a reflection. I avoid all pictures of my old self, the ones with the double dimples and the short afro. I don't allow my husband to take new ones. Toya, Toya, Cocoa Puff, mess with her, she'll beat you up. Bang, bang, choo-choo train, watch Toya shake her thing. My friends sang while I was growing up. Never again. I avoid calls from my friends and my sorority sisters. I don't check their messages. The same people who claimed, you don't talk like that anymore, were the same ones who had announced we were post-racial, the same ones who had never been followed around beauty supply stores by owners, never heard locking doors when they walked by occupied cars, never had others cross the street to avoid walking by them, never had someone shoot them under the assumption their ID was a gun. Now, maybe I could be one of them, but at what cost? My family leave will expire soon, but I can't go back into public relations and be a face labeled with just less cosmetics when I don't even look like us. I started to look for a job with less client-facing work where I could show up in an avatar of my old self. I did what the doctors told me never to do, a search for my new face. The search was fast, easy. She was one of the victims of a school shooting across the country. The shooting didn't get much coverage because that same week there had been a half dozen school shootings, including a shooting at a concert that killed over 200 people. She was one of 3 who died in a lesser-known shooting. Disgruntled coworker, 1 bullet to her head, her body preserved, but her consciousness did not survive. Her husband had received an undisclosed payout from the Family of Victims of School Shootings Act. I love her so much, her husband said in a projection of the newscast. I just miss her. I searched the husband and found his semi-private social media account. A man who keeps appearing in my dreams, a bald-headed man with small teeth. They had married in a destination wedding in Costa Rica. She wore a bright orange wedding dress, her wispy blonde hair clipped around her face in an asymmetrical bob. They were sunburned and smiling. There was an option to send him a message, so I sent him one. I am in your wife's body. Almost immediately, I received a response. Who are you? Is this a joke? I wish it was. They gave me the wrong body. I got hers. There was silence, nearly an hour of it. A text box with no indication if he was typing or even there. What was I even doing? And then, can I see you? I should have told him no, that I was just joking, that these tragedies were a sick joke something had played on the world, that everything was unfair and unexplained and unjust, and we were not supposed to speak about it. No one wants to be uncomfortable. Not talking about it is what makes the senseless happen continue to happen. Are you still there, he asked. Hello. I did all the things you should never do online. I told him my real name. I sent him a picture of how I looked before, the one with my arms wrapped tightly around my 2 girls as we posed in front of Big Bird. He asked to see a picture of me now. I told him, let's meet. I sent him the address of a cafe in the city and told him the next time he's in the city, because everyone always wants to come to the city, we can meet. He said he's buying a ticket as we type. So, this is where I'm at now, waiting at this cafe in the city, waiting for a man I do not know. My husband was very surprised to see me shed my pajamas and put on an old outfit, a black rayon knee-length dress that used to hug the curves of my previous body in the right places. Now it drooped on my smaller frame. I added a gold buckle to define my waist. I told him I was going to see an old friend. He didn't ask who. Instead, he asked, "Aren't you afraid?" I told him I needed to be out the house. "Whatever you think is best," he said. "We'll get there, Toya. We just need more time." When her husband walks in, this blonde man with tiny teeth, this stranger in his memory, I almost stand and escape. He looks at me with so much hope. "Eliza," he asks. I shake my head. "Toya?" "Toya." There are tears in his eyes. We go to drinks, a double shot espresso for him, a black tea for me. He starts to say Eliza likes and shakes his head. I know the answer, but I don't say it out loud. "Cappuccino, foamy." Instead, I touch his hand and he doesn't pull away. I trace his knuckles, his fingers. He doesn't recoil, he just looks relieved. "Tell me," I say, "what was Eliza like?" He tells me. I let him talk and talk. She loved hydrangeas at Halloween. She loved skydiving. They had a cockatiel named Algonquin. He wants to say, "you," I can feel it, but he restrains himself. What he does say over and over again, "Thank you, thank you, thank you." I let this man run his fingers over my face. Nothing odd, nothing sexual, only the soft touch of a stranger's fingers, caresses, skin stroking skin, the feathery sensation declaring, "You exist, Toya, you exist." Thank you.
Thank you, Sakinah. Next up, we have Matthew Kressel. Matthew Kressel is a multiple Nebula and World Fantasy Award nominated author and coder. His many works of short fiction have appeared in Analog, Asimov's, Lightspeed, Clark's World, Tor.com/Reactor, Beneath Ceaseless Skies, and many other publications and anthologies, including multiple years' bests. 18 of his stories will be included in his debut collection, Histories Within Us, coming from Census 5 Press in February. His far future novel, Space Trucker Jess, is coming in 2025 from Fairwood Press. And his Mars-based novella, The Rainseekers, is forthcoming from Tor.com in early 2026. Alongside Ellen Datlow, he runs the Fantastic Fiction at KGB reading series in Manhattan. And he is the creator of the Moksha submission system used by many of the largest fiction publishers today.
Thank you, Emily, and thank you all for coming. Thanks to Asimov's and Analog for hosting us. I actually did have, is this too loud? I did have an AI story that I was going to read called Model Collapse, but it's actually really bleak and disturbing, and I thought I'd rather not leave everyone with that mood. And also the story that I'm going to read is probably less disturbing. It is coming out in the next issue of Asimov's, which I believe is like out this week or next week. Today, yeah, there we go. So this story is. I was interested in the idea of when technology that we consider extremely advanced becomes old to people in the future, like another cycle of technology. So this is essentially about a space elevator operator who is forced into retirement. I'm going to try to read the whole thing, but if I go long, just give me a flag and I'll stop. The story is called 500 kph Toward Heaven. And so there I was, Garrity says over the pumping music, trying to calm this little Korean girl who's there without her mama, real scared at how high we're getting, how the horizon's starting to bow, when I see movement outside the window. The four of them lean against the illuminated bar, Garrity, Therese, Anton, and Sophia, like rocks on the bank of a river, while hundreds of well-dressed folks swirl around them in human eddies. The air reeks of perfume, alcohol, and pretension. Garrity waves obnoxiously at the tuxedoed bartender and points to his empty glass. Therese hasn't been counting, but she's pretty sure he's had at least 6. And get this, Garrity goes on, there's this geek hanging outside the carriage, like actually in space, knocking on the window like he's delivering takeout. Sophia chortles up bubbly, and Anton gives his trademark Slavic smile. But Therese can only sigh. She knows Garrity's Hitcher story better than she knows the 48 emergency exit procedures on this Excelsior AX6 class lift carriage. Garrity's the type of geek who, even sober, gets high on his own farts. And now he's half a dozen cutties in. He's told the story 1,000 times to any schmuck dull enough to listen. And Therese knows that half the story is exaggerated, the other half changed with each telling. So at this point, it's negative 8,000% true. Still, he yammers on. When the bartender finally refills Garrity's glass, she asks for another Negroni. It's open bar, and what the hell, she might as well go out with a bang. Maybe the geek had to piss or take a deuce or his O2 got low. I don't know, Garrity says. All I know is a moment later, I'm donning a spacesuit, the passengers are all freaking out, and corporate's screaming in my ear, wanting to know what the hell's going on. So I say, yeah, Ground, there actually is someone clinging outside the carriage. And so, Ground, you want I should let him in? Sophia laughs, snorts, and knocks over her flute. Expensive champagne flies everywhere. The bartender scowls and comes to clean up. Over in section 5B, under a sinuous Art Deco curbs framing a huge window that looks out over nighttime India, a silver-trimmed DJ spins out late 21st century classics. Nearby, Dan Sabo, retiring CEO, ugly dances with an expensively dressed swarm of pretty young things. Therese wonders if he hired them just for this event. Sabo's body went to seed decades back, but he's still weirdly handsome, his face frozen in time like a shellacked leaf. An hour ago, Therese requested the DJ play some Jane Janan, to mix it up, but the songs haven't come on and she doubts they ever will. Just last week, this carriage was tastefully adorned with velvet chairs, rococo couches, tropical plants and Grecian urns, and so many marble tables you never had to reach more than an arm's length to put down your glass. There were bunks along the perimeter 4 stories high, human beehives framed in teak mahogany and elegance. With your head on their plush pillows, you could watch the earth recede outside your window as you slowly fell asleep. But corporate removed all that to make room for this party, and despite the colorful lights and the throbbing music, it just seems sad. Nobody's gonna ride this box to space again. They got fast, cheap ships for that now. Corporate billed this as a celebration, a praise of all the millions of Jeeps S-Corp hoisted to space and deposited back down on Terra. So easy and frequent that riding the K-lift rivaled the safety of all other forms of travel combined, even historically. But Therese knows what this really is, a wake. And so when I get the hitcher inside and yank off his helmet, Garrity says, it's just this pimply-faced Indonesian kid. Last time Garrity told us, Therese recalls, the kid was Filipino. And he tells me in broken Hindi, Cantonese last time, that he couldn't afford no ticket, so he bought some shoddy secondhand spacesuit, somehow snuck past security, tighter than Dan Sabo's asshole, and clung his skinny ass to the outside of the carriage, hoping to ride it all the way to orbit. He's lucky he banged on the window when he did, because his whole suit was one crease away from tearing. There's no way Dan Sabo hears them over the music, and Therese doesn't care what the CEO thinks now, but she still reflexively looks over at him. Dan Sabo, her boss's boss's boss, happily grinds himself into a young, shirtless man while deftly not spilling his martini. What about you, T? Garrity says. Got any good ones? Therese glances out the window, then up at the ascent clock. It shows lift elapsed time, LET. Barely 2 hours have passed since they left ground outside Kulasekarapatnam, but it feels like they've been climbing for a week. God, she loathes corporate parties. Already there are thousands of clicks above the earth, the horizons bending like an old man, and a faint orange crescent of the coming dawn rims the east. But Therese doesn't need clocks or screens or trigonometry to know their velocity and altitude, or how long it would take if the cables snapped and they were flung into free fall for them to crash into the Indian Ocean. If the DJ wasn't pumping out such obnoxious music, she could close her eyes and tell by the carriage vibration where they were along the 70-hour ride. But that's all over. 3 months ago, when she first heard about S-Corp shutting down, declaring bankruptcy, selling off assets, She said she was glad to finally retire. Fuck this goddamn job was her morning slogan, but now it stings worse than ever. Yeah, I got a tale, she says. You probably heard it, but since Garrity's so fond of repeating himself, it's only fair to subject y'all to the same. Oh, Sophia says, wincing, I think I know which story you mean. I don't, Anton says, leaning in. He's only worked S-Corp for 3 short years and hasn't heard all the crap yet. Tell me. They call us captains, Therese says, but we're just glorified elevator operators. This elicits nods from all but Anton, who frowns. The carriages mostly drive themselves, nothing to do but watch readouts that barely change and check in with dock or ground every few hours. With so much free time, you notice things, like the feel of different groups of passengers. You can tell within the first 5 minutes which groups are going to be easy and which are going to take blood from you. Tell me about it, Sophia says. So this ride's got 241 Jeeps, Therese says, about half full, but as soon as we leave ground, I smell tension. It's subliminal, like a buildup of static charge. I knew there'd be problems, so I thought I'd get ahead of it. I ordered the ride attendants to give everyone a free round of drinks, get them drunk and sleepy, and maybe they'd bed early. That was a mistake. Alcohol only made them rowdy. It was like animals in a cage. No one likes being cooped up for long. They had energy and no place to expel it. I always said they should install the gym in these carriages, Sophia says, right over there in the corner by... Let her finish, Anton says. Sorry, Sophia says. Go on. So it's 3:48 LET, Teresa says, and the thrill of the ride's starting to wear off for the space virgins. The carriage smells like corn chips and farts, and most of the adults are whining like toddlers past their bedtime. One of the attendants reports to me that it's getting ugly in 4B, passengers fighting about bunk assignments or something. By the time I get over there, there's a scrum on the floor. It's an ugly rugby match. Fists are flying, everyone's screaming. The young woman's trying to pull her dad out of the scrum when I hear a pop. She screams and blood starts gushing from her neck. Holy shit, Anton says. I hate this fucking story, Sophia says. So I have no idea what happened, Therese goes on, and suddenly the alarm starts shrieking, Atmos venting into space, and at the sound of the alarm, the brawl just stops, like a ref blew a whistle, and everyone in the scrum turns to me with this terrified look. And now I'm worried someone's got a gun. This poor girl spraying blood like a fire hose, and though I want to save her, if I don't fix the leak, we're all toast. I run the checklist in my head, but I don't need to see no screen to spot the problem. Right behind where the girl was standing, she's a bleeding pile on the floor. There's a hole in the window about 3 mils wide. Therese holds up her forefinger and thumb to demonstrate, but I can see the air venting into space in a brilliant white jet. Worse, the fleeing air is imparting a small but significant force perpendicular to our ascent. The RCS is compensating, but it won't be enough if I can't stop the outgassing. I don't feel it yet, but the computer says the jets are causing the carriage to oscillate, and if I don't stop the venting in the next 5 minutes, the oscillation will get dangerously high. It will be like a flea trying to hang on to a plucked guitar string. The computer's telling me it wants to activate the emergency escape system, which means high-speed ejection from the cables, a swift re-entry into atmosphere, and a hard splash in the Indian Ocean. Holy shit, Anton says. You hard ejected? Let her finish, Garrity says. So I order everyone to their seats, harnesses on, while I grab the sealer kit. I leap over the poor, bleeding girl to seal the hole, and meanwhile the computer's counting down to emergency eject. I've got less than a minute. I feel the cabin temp dropping fast and my ears are popping as I squeeze out the whole tube of sealant and slam the suction plate on the hole. And 10 seconds before our carriage would have been hard ejected from the cables, the pressure stabilizes. We've got lots of wobble on the line, but the computer says the RCS can handle it. So now I turn my attention back to the bleeding girl. She's wailing on the floor and her father's freaking out beside her, and everyone else is strapped into their seats watching in horror. Blood spurting from her neck, spraying everywhere. Her father's doused in it, and I know this poor girl's going to die unless I can stop her bleeding. I give her a shot of medicine to slow down her heart, then slap derm patches on her neck. The blood stops pouring out, but she's still bleeding internally. If I don't get her to hospital soon, she's a goner. I don't have time to reach my station. Every second counts. so I order the computer to emergency reverse. I tell the father to strap into his seat, and while I'm holding on to this girl with one hand and his seat with another, we come to a hard stop. It's so fast the poor girl almost flies to the ceiling, but I hang on. Then we reverse and start to fall. We're in free fall the whole way down. Passengers are throwing up, and globules of vomit and blood are floating around the carriage like stars and planets. We made ground 8 long minutes later. And the girl, Anton asks, she lived, Therese says, but it was close. Oh, thank Christ, Anton says with a sigh. So did you ever figure out what caused the hole? Did someone smuggle a gun aboard? Therese reaches into the nape of her cocktail dress, pulls out a small pendant. On the end of her necklace, a dull gray metal bead. Micrometeoroid impact, she says. Technically, a piece of an old satellite. Russia tested an anti-sat weapon way back in 2021 and blew up one of their own. The explosion sent thousands of little pieces into high traffic orbits. It was so fucking reckless and stupid, everyone was rightfully pissed. They almost destroyed the old International Space Station where Russia had crew. The world had to deal with the debris for decades. They swept up most of it in the 2040s, but there's still a fair bit of it flying around out there they can't track. Sophia looks nervously out the windows. I remember reading about that in training, she says. It still freaks me out. Carriage glass is harder than steel, Therese says. It's designed to protect against small micrometeoroid impacts, but this was one of the bigger ones. Most of the metal ablated and burned off when it hit the window, but a tiny piece made it through. A little blob of hot metal that ripped through that poor girl's neck and lodged itself in the glass on the opposite side of the carriage. It cooled into this. You keep that thing around your neck, Anton says? That's morbid. It reminds me of how fragile life is, Therese says, fingering it. She's flush and sweaty, but the orb's oddly cold. At any moment we could. The music abruptly quiets, and Therese realizes with a pang of dread that Dan Sabo's about to make a speech. He climbs onto a chair and thanks everyone for coming. He can barely stand. He's wasted. It's been really, really great spending all these last years with you. Each of you have, in your own superb way, made ESCORM great. I love you all. Dan Sabo toasts everyone to weak applause and less weak heckling, then drones on for long minutes about character and progress. But Therese loses interest with everyone else. At some point, one of the hot young things pulls Sabo down from the chair before he embarrasses himself further. Now I'm depressed, Anton says, downing his drink. Anyone got an upbeat story? I got one, Sophia says, shouting over the sound of some awfully remixed late 20th century pop. Dan Sabo dances alone. I helped a woman give birth right there. She points to section 7A behind a miniature palm, where 2 women are tongue-kissing. A third looks west toward the Arabian Sea. She named her boy after me, Safir. He's 6 now. We're still in touch. I get messages from him every week. Aw, Anton says, that's so sweet. The mom's lucky corporate didn't claim ownership of him, Garrity says with a scowl, then waves at the bartender for another fill. So what's next for y'all, Sophia says. Got any plans? Me, I'm out, Garrity says. Sister's got a ranch in Laramie. Nothing but wild horses and prairie. But who'll you tell your awful stories to, Sophia says. The horses got no choice but to listen, Garrity says. I got offers to lead group tours above Saturn's rings, Anton says, but it's so far from Earth, you know? I'm still thinking about it. I want to get the hell away from here, Sophia says. I'm going on the grand tour. Really, Garrity says? That's what old farts do when they retire. You're like, what, 35? 38, Sophia says. And so what? Maybe I just want to see all the planets up close. Sure, Garrity says, sure, but make sure to bring your walker. Anton smirks, but Sophia frowns. Well, what about you, T? Garrity asks. What's next? Therese shrugs. I really don't know. Come on, Sophia says. There's nothing you want to do? I started working for S Corp when I was 20, Therese says. I piloted 976 round trips. I ferried 462,000 people into space and took another 431,000 down. I made a point to speak with my passengers every ride. I can fluently speak English, Mandarin, Cantonese, Filipino, Japanese, Greek, Hindi, Spanish, French, and Urdu. I can recognize the contours of any country in the Eastern Hemisphere, even on moonless nights. I've lived in the same tiny flat in Perumal Purnam for 19 long years. And when I'm there, all I can think about is getting back up here, rising above it all. There's nothing else like it. Sophia, Garrity, and Anton all nod. Piloting carriages is all I know. There's more things in heaven and earth, T. Sophia says. You could tour the solar system with me, just us girls. It'll be a blast. You're drunk, Therese says. You really don't want me tagging along. I'd be a drag. Nah, Sophia says, but she frowns and finishes her champagne. Never thought I'd say it, Garrity says, looking round at all the people and somehow seeing past them. But I'm gonna miss this place. Me too, Anton says, and I haven't been piloting a quarter as long as you old drags. Garrity punches Anton in the shoulder. Watch your mouth, you young un, or I'll make you fetch a switch. Huh? Anton says. Old Wyoming jokes, says Garrity. Teresa's tired of them, or maybe she's just tired. I have to pee, she says, and flees the bar. She takes her Negroni with her. She weaves through mobs of people toward a slightly less crowded corner. Beside the gold-trimmed floor-to-ceiling windows, there used to be a huge couch and a circle of chairs, but that's all gone. She has to get close to the glass to see outside over the reflection of the party's lights. She can just make out the tip of Mogadishu, a spot of webbed orange light in the wine-dark sea. She watches the stars set one after another behind the silhouette of Earth. She ferried almost 500,000 people to space, and it was always the same. As the blue sky ebbed to black and the ground slowly slipped away, as it was doing just now, people felt the true scale of things, how small a speck of dirt actually is. Corporate executive or slum kid, it didn't matter. The universe doesn't care how rich you are. 1 trillion divided by infinity is still 0. Up here, everyone is nothing and therefore equal. And when titles and rank and class and nation are stripped away, ancient walls crumble. Everyone above and below was always rushing to and fro, moving fast but never getting anywhere. But here, on this carriage, life paused for a time, and in this space, relationships had room to be born. She nurtured as many as she could. She felt it her duty to bridge divides, connect opposites, span unspannable chasms. She'd been successful more times than she could count. She fastened herself more a gardener than a pilot, and how many of those seeds sprouted, grew. Beautiful, isn't it? She turns and the shellacked face of Dan Sabo is beaming at her. She doesn't smile back. You're Therese, he says. Captain Vamvakadis, she says. Of course, he says, our number 2. Only one other pilot has more rides than you, and he retired last year. Yeah, and I would have broken Sukhdeo's record if I had 6 more months. Yeah, well, Sabo says, what can you do? She downs her Negroni, its bitter taste lingers on her tongue. She wonders if smashing her glass into Dan's head would void her severance package. I ask you something, she says. Why are you over here talking to me instead of that hot young thing? That boy's been sweating you all night. I ask you something, he says. I had a look at your record. You hardly took a day off in 20 years. You picked up shifts left and right up to the maximum cap. You must have really loved your job. Her heart hurts so much she can barely nod. It's a shame it has to close, he says. And why does it? She fails to hide the venom in her voice. You got more bank than Switzerland in your pocket. You can keep it running. People are still riding. Not like they used to, he says. It takes almost 70 hours to get from ground to orbit. 69 hours, 51 minutes, 13 seconds, she says. Right, so why sit inside a cramped, smelly compartment for more than 2 days with a bunch of grumpy strangers when you can fly to low Earth orbit in 20 minutes in a ship for half the price? It's not smart business. Strangers in, friends out, she says. Sometimes there's benefits to going slow. Tell that to my stockholders, he says. You could keep it open for nostalgia's sake, he laughs. Come ride the old lift, he mock announces. How they used to get to space in the old days. He laughs at himself. Do you know how expensive these things are to maintain? It costs more per month to run this lift than the annual GDP of small nations. Who do you think's going to pay for all that? It took decades to build. The effort of 33 nations working together. All that just to tear it all down? Who's going to pay, he says. And without regular maintenance, the lift becomes a safety hazard. She's heard this all before, the rationale on the news and in corporate messages, but never from the man himself. This is my life, she says. Was, he says. I'm sorry, Therese, but nothing lasts forever. Captain Vamvakadis. Is this what you came over here for? To shove it in my face? He looks surprised, then offended. Fuck no, I just came over to say thanks. He stares at her for a tense moment. Well, Good luck, Captain von Vacadis. I hope happiness finds you wherever you land. And with this, he heads back to his fawning entourage. Therese sighs and stares out the window to watch more stars set. Eventually, she finds her way back to the bar. Ooh, Sophia says playfully, saw you getting chatty with the big man. Any chemistry there? No interest, Therese says, at all. She orders another Negroni. Just then, the sun breaks the orange rim of the eastern horizon, and the DJ, late to the cue, cuts into Also Sprach Zarathustra. Everyone turns to the rising sun, their faces bright and aglow, eyes wide and sparkling, struck dumb by the view. This is what she'll miss most. Rich, poor, old, young, the majesty got you any which way, flattened you out to nothing, and so left you full of possibility. She never got bored of this, not after 2,000 times, the sun breaking over crescent earth, dawn sweeping across the world, while her carriage sped 500 clicks per hour toward heaven. The bartender whispers, sorry dear, we're at a gin. You want something else? And as she fingers the metallic bead on her necklace, she says, no, nothing else. Thank you.
Thank you. Up next, we have Sarah Pinsker. Sarah Pinsker is the Hugo and Nebula winning author of the novels A Song for a New Day and We Are Satellites, plus the collections Sooner or Later Everything Falls into the Sea and Lost Places. Over 60 pieces of short fiction, including Nebula winner Our Lady of the Open Road, published in Asimov's, and most recently, the novella Haunt Sweet Home. She's currently the Kratz Writer-in-Residence at Goucher College and lives in Baltimore with her wife and 2 weird dogs.
Hi there. Thank you so much for having me. And I'm going to read a story that came out in Asimov's a few years ago. I don't think I need to give it any purpose. It's called The Low Hum of Her. Father built me a new grandmother when the real one died. She's not a replacement, he said, as if anything could be. This one was made of clay and metal, all run through with wires to conduct electricity, which Father said made her a lot like us. At her center, where we have hearts and guts, she had a brass bird cage. I don't know how he made her face look right. He put my real Bubby's clothing on her and wrapped one of my real Bubby's headscarves around her iron gray hair and put Bubby's identification papers into her skirt pocket and told me to call her Bubby. Does it cook? I asked him. Does it bake or sing? She can, said Father. Those are exactly the things she can do. You just have to teach her. She can look after you and keep you company when I'm working. I won't call it Bubby. Call her what you like. Maybe you can say the new Bubby and she when you're around me, though. I worked hard to make her for you. He had spent months at his workbench, long evenings after days spent teaching, and then long days after he was no longer allowed to work at the university. I had heard him cry sometimes when he thought I was asleep. She, I repeated, eyeing the machine. That night, it offered help as I prepared beets for soup. Just stand in the corner and watch, I said. You don't know how. It followed my instructions. I stained the kitchen red with my messy chopping while it stood in the corner. How strange to see something that looked so much like Bubby lurking in the dark corner where she never would have been found. Too much to do, she would have said. I'll rest when I'm dead. Now she was dead, and her absence was an ache in my chest. The fake Bubby was quiet for a while, then spoke again. Teach me the songs you're singing, Tatiana. We can sing together while you cook. I hushed it and sang the old song softly to myself, imitating my grandmother's quavering soprano. There was no we, I told myself. There was Father, and there was me, and there was the hole that Bubby had left. No machine could replace her, even one that looked and sounded like her. It didn't even know to call me my nickname, Tanya. Or perhaps Father told it that would be too familiar. I had started a notebook of recipes and songs back before my real Bubby took ill. She hated that notebook. She said I should remember with my hands and heart and not leave a book to do the remembering for me. Each night after she was gone, I flipped through the pages and chose something to make, trying to recreate her recipes precisely. I made new notes to myself when the recipes went wrong, trying to recapture the little details that hadn't made it on the page. On the page for challah, my original transcription said, need. Use your back to knead, I remember Bubby saying when she first showed me how. Your hands will get tired without the help of your back. She threw her whole body into the effort. Her whole front was coated in flour by the end. Bosoms, she sighed in false despair, dusting herself off. I wrote use back next to knead. Still, the dough never worked out as well for me as it had for her. The other recipes were the same way. My father ate each meal without complaint, but I longed to make us something that tasted as good as my grandmother's cooking. I tried and tried, with the new Bubby looking on from its corner. And then Father came rushing home early one afternoon. Tanya, we must leave the house now as if we were going for an afternoon stroll. We can take only what we can fit into Bubby. I started to correct him, to say new Bubby, but something in his tone silenced me. The new Bubby unbuttoned its blouse and opened the birdcage for us. For the first time, I understood what it was for. Father filled it with what little gold we had, my real Bubby's rings and necklaces and the Shabbos candlesticks, all wrapped in headscarves so they wouldn't rattle. Father's prayer book. I put in the pictures of my parents at their wedding and a portrait of Bubby with the grandfather I never knew, and my book of songs and recipes. I saw my father glance back just once, and I looked back too. The house looked sad. The eaves drooped and the window boxes sagged empty. Father had been too busy to fix the eaves, and I had not known when to plant seeds for spring flowers. Bubby had always done that. What if my memories of my mother and grandmother were so tied to that house that they stayed behind? I whispered one of Bubby's songs under my breath to show the memories they could come with us. We walked away. The trees still had more flowers and leaves, but rain the night before had driven some of the petals to the ground. The petals were soft underfoot and muted our footsteps on the cobblestones. The street smelled like lilacs and rain, and I listened for screams and jackboots that I never heard, and the three of us strolled down to the river and along its bank as if there were no hurry in the world. We walked away from home just like that, just kept walking with nothing but the valuables that traveled inside the cage of the new Bubby's chest. One of Father's friends met us outside the city as evening fell. He gave us black bread and cheese and drove us through the night. We stopped once to show papers. A soldier shined a light into the car and looked at our documents while another held a rifle at the ready. They opened all the doors in the boot of the automobile. "Where are you going, grandmother?" the one soldier asked the new Bubby. I held my breath. "My son, he has all the answers," it said. It was something Bubby had always said. I didn't even know this one knew how to say it. I didn't hear Father's explanation for our travel over the pounding of my heart. The light lingered in our faces for another moment, then went out. "No bag," said the one soldier to the other. They raised the gate to let us through. We drove on. I wished Father had sat in the backseat with me to stroke my hair and reassure me. Instead, the new Bubby reached for my hand in the darkness of the car. For the first time, I let it. I fell asleep on its lap, listening to the low hum of it and pretending it was a lullaby. Father's friends left us in a strange city in the morning. There, Father purchased a small trunk and a suitcase and clothing for us, then tickets aboard a steamship for the following day. He only bought 2 tickets. I watched from our hotel room's single sagging bed as he dismantled the new Bubby. "I'm sorry I have to do this," he said to it. It shrugged and sighed a very Bubby-like sigh, weighted with suffering and understanding. I shivered when the light went out of its eyes. "Why didn't you just buy her a ticket?" I asked. "There will be closer quarters on the next part of our journey, Tanya, and inspections. She can fool anyone who's not expecting a person to be something other than a person, but she would not pass a medical examination." He separated it into several parts, tying and braiding wires back into themselves in neat bundles. I averted my gaze when he took its face. He left the torso intact like a dressmaker's form with its birdcage core and all of our valuables hidden within. Disassembled, she fit into the small trunk he had purchased that afternoon. At the docks, we were assigned numbers in a group. We descended a steep staircase to the steerage compartment, pushed and prodded the whole way like cattle. Father needed both hands for the trunk that contained the new Bubby, so I gripped his coat with one hand and the suitcase with the other, trying not to get separated from him in the crush of people. 2 more levels down, we found the family quarters, where we were permitted to claim 2 iron bunks and the narrow gap between them. That night, Father placed the trunk at the foot of his straw mattress. He slept curled up like a baby in the space that remained. I tried not to think about the collection of parts in the trunk, which had once seemed so close to alive. Life was a fragile thing. I'd seen my grandmother's body after her passing, but I was not there to witness the light leaving her eyes. Our quarters smelled like sweat and wet wool and sick, and so many noises. Other families murmured, babies cried, and somewhere an old woman moaned. The steam engine churned and clanked. I struggled to sleep at first, but I soon learned to tune out the families and let the sounds of the ship lull me. The engine sounds from the deepest part of the ship's belly reminded me of the new Bubby, and that in turn reminded me of my own Bubby's voice. I let the sounds blur together, real and imaginary, alive and almost alive. I did not count the days, but gave over to the indignities of the situation. We had no dining area, but ate on the floor or on our bunks. We gnawed hard biscuits and picked insects out of our soup. My cooking was fit for royalty compared to the ship's fare, and at least I had never lost a hairpin into my stew. After each meal, I waited in line to dunk our tin plates in a basin of seawater, and in another line to wash my face and hands. I considered the new Bubby in pieces in the trunk whenever I felt too cramped. We arrived in the place Father said would be our new home. As he had warned, there were physical inspections. They checked our hair, face, neck, and hands, which the new Bubby might have passed, then our eyes, which she might not have. The doctors had chalk in their hands and marked the clothing of some. I tried to regulate my breathing, tried to turn myself into a machine incapable of weakness, and hoped Father was doing the same. We passed the doctors and the interrogators, and then we were in the new place with nothing but our trunk and our suitcase. Father had the address of a colleague from his old university, and we walked for an hour to reach his house. Mr. Levitan embraced my father, despite what must have been the overwhelming stink of us. He helped us secure an apartment that very day. Perhaps the odor sped his actions. Still, he took the time to ask me questions about our journey, and he gave me candy that tasted both sweet and citrus sour at once. The new apartment was much smaller than our old house. That didn't matter since we had fewer things. The building smelled like lemons and pickles and cigarettes, and the sunlight that filtered through the window was more intense than the light where we had come from. Bells rang often throughout the day. Father reassembled the new Bubby. I didn't admit it to him, but when he reconnected her circuits, I was relieved to see that she had survived her travel without any damage. I listened as he explained our new situation. She shrugged and nodded. Father said not to leave the apartment, which was easy since we had no place to go. The new Bubby was my only company now that Father was away working even longer hours than he had at home. She had not asked her questions since we moved to the new place. Father brought home only bread and herring, so she had no reason to help with the cooking. He bought me a radio. I listened to that in place of singing, though I recognized few of the songs, didn't know the language the announcers spoke. The electricity in our building was inconsistent, surging and dropping at various points throughout most days. For the most part, the power would resume mere moments after the interruption, but one morning it went out and didn't come back on. My radio cut out in mid-song. I paced the floor, at first in boredom and then in fear. Hours passed and the room grew dark. What if something happened and Father can't come home, I asked the new Bubby. What if we're alone? Pshaw, she said. For the first time since the car ride, I let her take me in her arms. The whir of her inner workings reassured me. She was something the outage couldn't touch. It took a minute to realize she was singing. Quietly at first, then louder when I didn't make her stop. She sang one of Bubby's songs, the ones I had sung under my breath when I didn't want her to hear. Her voice cracked like porcelain on the high notes. I wanted her to sing another, and she seemed pleased when I asked her to do so. So I joined her on the chorus. We sang another and another, the old songs and the ones from the radio, and passed the day in that way. I didn't even notice when the electricity came back on. Late that night, Father arrived with a chicken and an onion and a sack of kasha. Get your recipe book, Tanya, he said. We'll have a feast. I shook my head. The real Bubby said to remember with my hands, so I showed the new Bubby how the secret to kasha was to mix in the chicken fat. She got grease on her blouse like the real Bubby. I taught her to say bosoms and sigh, as the real Bubby always had. My thought that day was if I taught her hands the recipes, if her lips knew Bubby's songs, then there would always be two of us to remember, even when Father was away. My real grandmother had been my teacher, but this one needed me to teach her. You can call me Tanya, I said to her. It might have been my imagination, but I thought she looked pleased. "What will you call me?" she asked. I considered. Bubby did not fit any longer, nor the new Bubby as I had addressed her with such derision. "What would you like to be called?" She shrugged. "You choose. Call me something with meaning to you." I gave her the name Chaya, alive. She was no longer just a reminder of the grandmother I had lost, but her own thing. She will be with me always, I hope. Someday, she and I will show my children and grandchildren how to make kreplach and kasha varnishkas. Someday, they will wonder at the birdcage in her chest, which still holds my old book of recipes and the photo of my grandparents. Someday, I will have hair as gray as hers, and then grayer. I will lean over the table and cover my own blouse with flour and sigh and say bosoms, with the right note of false despair so the children around me will giggle. When the others go to sleep, she and I will remember it together, and I will listen to the low hum of her, and we will sing each other lullabies.
Thank you. For our last reader, we have Mercurio D. Rivera. Mercurio D. Rivera's short fiction has won Readers' Awards for Asimov's and Interzone magazines and has appeared in markets such as the Magazine of Fantasy and Science Fiction, Lightspeed, IO9, Nature, Black Static, and various anthologies, podcasts, and best-of collections. His novel, Wergen, The Alien Love War, published by New Con Press, which was nominated for the Arthur C. Clarke Award, tells stories of unrequited love set against the backdrop of humanity's complicated relationship with an enigmatic alien species. And his Asimov story, Beyond the Tattered Veil of Stars, was podcast by Dust Studios and features Gillian Jacobs of Community and Justin Kirk of Weeds, and is available anywhere you listen to podcasts.
Hi everybody, pleasure to be here. Unfortunately, I don't have anything short enough to read in the time allotted, so I'm going to just read the beginning of Beyond the Tattered Veil of Stars, and you can just listen to the rest of it online. You can go to YouTube or to wherever you listen to podcasts and listen to the rest of it. So I'll just read the beginning of this. It's called Beyond the Tattered Veil of Stars, Chapter 63, God's Breath. The people followed the purification rituals precisely, fasting 3 times a month and holding group prayers in the shallow seawaters off of Verdant Cove. With the orange sun setting on the horizon, they lay half submerged in the surf, scrubbing the scales off their snouts with diamonds. And as their skin tore, they pushed forward through their lacerations, flesh rippling backward, downward, until their new bodies emerged. In this way, they shed their transgressions. They collected and piled hundreds of sloths' skins, and after blessing the discarded flesh, cleansing it of all sin, they feasted. Ravenous from fasting, they tore into the mounds of skins, giving praise to the gods for the food they devoured. And as they ate, they prayed for clean air. The thick gases, identified as excess carbon dioxide, methane, and nitrous oxide, had appeared 5 years earlier, suffocating Mother Earth in the planetary haze. Blue skies turned sickly gray and temperatures rose steadily. Powerful hurricanes devastated the 7 continents, and the Arctic ice sheets retreated, inundating coastal communities, displacing millions. It was a cruel test of the people's will and faith. Fortunately, House Jarella thrived on such challenges. The people set aside long-standing tribal feuds to establish think nests across the globe, teams devoted to determining the cause of the crisis. Planetary surveys revealed no volcanic eruptions, no artificial source for the gases, no explanation whatsoever, confirming what the people feared most. The threat was divine in origin. The gods had judged them and found them wanting. The think nests expanded their ranks and intensified their studies, running ever more complex simulations in the hope of arriving at some answer. For while the problem was divine, the solution, they believed, could be found in the natural world. Still, to be safe, the people redoubled their prayers and rituals, begging for the gods' mercy. Between the efforts of the think nests and the mass prayers and rituals, the people held on to their resolute faith in the gods and in themselves. For if they were not tested, how could they prove themselves worthy? From the Chronicles of House Jarella, excerpt by Shenri, daughter of Siska. Scene break. Corey, Milagros Maldonado said, holding open the door. Come in, you're right on time. He was unsure whether to shake her hand or hug her. Instead, he stomped his boots on the welcome mat while making small talk about the August snowstorm. She guided him into a Spartan living room where he took a seat in the only piece of furniture, a sectional sofa. The last time they'd seen each other had been at MIT 7 years earlier, when they dated briefly. She had the same dull eyes, same thin lips, and dark brown hair pulled back into a ponytail. Well, he said after a long pause, shall we begin? Thank you. When we go public with the discoveries I've made, she turned and finally looked him in the eye. Everything's going to change, Corey. He maintained a pleasant smile. If Milagro sensed his desperation, she might be less forthcoming. And since she formerly worked at IntelliCorp in research and development and left the company on bad terms, she might very well be sitting on something juicy. Timing is critical, she said. Even with the best of intentions, revealing too much information too quickly could destabilize markets. That's why I reached out to you when I saw your Neuronews byline. I need someone I know, someone I can trust. She had an odd way of showing her trust. Then again, they'd only known each other briefly a lifetime ago, years before the San Diego wildfires destroyed his home, before his father's death from lung cancer and his own diagnosis and treatment for bone cancer. He scraped by on public assistance until he ran into Charlie Bierbaum, a friend of his father's who'd offered him a gig in New York as a content provider for Neuronews. Although Corey had busted his ass for the past 6 months, Charlie had been brutally honest. To be able to keep going on, he needed to increase his blinks drastically. So, this project of yours, he said, have you heard of the simulation hypothesis? She said. He shook his head. It's the theory that everything we experience as reality is in fact an illusion, that we're living in a simulated universe, a computer program run by super advanced civilizations. Bummer. He expected a smile, but she maintained her poker face. I don't want the idea much credence either, she said, but it was the source of inspiration for my project. Interesting, he said. It wasn't really, but best to humor her until she coughed up the big secret. If you couldn't generate 2 million blinks, he'd be out the door. Let me show you, Milagro said. She stepped into the hallway and punched the passcode on a solid steel door she pulled open. As they descended a stairwell, their footsteps triggered a light that bathed the basement in red, as if it were an old-fashioned developing room in a photographer's studio. The ceiling hung low and a computer sat on a laminated wooden desk. At the far side of the room, behind the plexiglass divider, a hologram of Earth floated in the darkness, rotating slowly. About 2 meters wide, the globe's size allowed him to make out the faint lights of cities beneath the blanket of clouds wafting in the thin atmosphere. Faint stars speckled in the room's walls, a grapefruit-sized simulation of the sun hovering in the far corner. This, Milagros said, is the project I've been working on the past 2 years. Virtual Earth. Wow, it's beautiful, his heart sank. A light show, no matter how dazzling, would never draw the blinks he needed. So, this is your big invention, a hologram of Earth. She smiled at last, shook her head. It's a tool of discovery, perhaps the greatest tool ever invented. V-Earth is a simulation powered by a network of neural algorithms, an extension of work done by AI, with AIs. I'm going to help people on an unimaginable scale, Corey. She stared at him as if trying to determine whether he grasped the magnitude of what she revealed. He was formulating an exit strategy when she said, I've programmed the simulation to track the evolution of life on Earth, natural catastrophes, the rise and fall of civilizations, all the wars, all the trials and tribulations we faced as a species. I've also introduced newer challenges such as global warming. And what did you learn, he said? That we're doomed. Invariably, we pollute the atmosphere and the oceans, warm the planet, destroy the food chain. I've run the program countless times and always get the same predictable outcome. Our inherent selfishness, our inability to empathize with the plight of others, other species, even with our own future generations, always destroys us. But then, she wagged her index finger excitedly, I restarted the sim and made a few tweaks to Earth's past. You reprogrammed human history? Yes, no, she shrugged, sort of. I explored numerous paths with Homo sapiens, but it didn't make much of a difference. All roads led to self-destruction. Then I went in a different direction. She stepped to the computer and swiped the touchscreen. Zoom in. The image of a cityscape, windowless edifices resembling 30-story gravestones, appeared on the plexiglass divider. Swarms of winged, yellow-skinned creatures darted in and out of hidden apertures in the structures. You're witnessing a live shot of present-day South America, a typical workday in Rio de Janeiro. She beamed at the image as if she were a child showing off her prized insect collection. Countless species have flickered into and out of existence in our prehistory. We're here today only because just the right combination of events created a niche for small mammals to thrive and to evolve, ultimately into the modern human. Eliminating any one of those events dramatically alters the form of life arising through natural selection. But no matter the mix, evolution, I found, favors intelligence. And here I thought it favored cockroaches, he said, chuckling nervously. Every change to prehistory resulted in the rise of a different apex form of intelligent life. In this version, no asteroid struck the Yucatan Peninsula. No extinction of the dinosaurs took place at that time. Instead, a disease I introduced 1 million years later wiped out most of the large dinosaurs along with small mammals, allowing an amphibious, salamander-like creature to survive and multiply. And voila, 100 million years later, we have the Sallies. The magnified image displayed 3 reptilian creatures at the base of a palm tree. One stood on its hind legs, 4 feet tall, with slick lime green skin and prehensile tail. The second had yellow skin and bore translucent wings, allowing it to hover a few feet off the ground. These were the ones flying over the city. The third, a grayscale creature, skittered on all fours and had larger, saucer-shaped eyes and a thicker tail. Patches of fungus spread thickly across their torsos. These are the predominant races of the species that rule the 7 continents. This is incredible. He had trouble finding his voice as he considered multiple story angles. Humankind replaced by lizards. Mad scientist alters history. The fall's new fashion, fungus. This story was sure to draw blinks, maybe in the tens of millions. So if I understand correctly, these creatures live literally in this world you've created? If I walk past the plexi divider, I could shake this globe with my bare hands? Well, no, you'd move right through it. It's a hollow, after all. But you could program a set of cosmic hands to shake the sphere, sure. The idea seemed to amuse her. She opened a drawer and pulled out a metal cube with thin hollow tubes protruding from 2 of its sides. This is the breakthrough I was referring to, the first of what I expect will be many revolutionary inventions to come. She handed him the contraption, which seemed made for the Sally's thin, delicate fingers. This is an extractor. It's 1,000% more efficient at segregating carbon than anything we've ever developed. It can remove excess greenhouse gases from the atmosphere within a 50-mile radius. The Sallies have installed large-scale versions of these extractors, thousands of them throughout their world. It took them decades, but they solved the problem of climate change. More than any other intelligent form of life I've evolved on the Earth, the Sallies are the ultimate problem solvers. This actually works. He held the extractor in the palm of his hand, shaken by what it represented perfectly. He stared at the hollow world, its poles barren of ice. It doesn't seem the device did the locals any good. Yeah, well, the Sallies took a long time to develop it. In the meantime, global warming ravaged their world, but it also gave them a tremendous incentive to develop a solution, which they did. He had trouble wrapping his mind around it. Had Milagros really solved the problem of climate change here in the basement of this house? It had to be a hoax. Or more likely, she deluded herself into actually believing this nonsense. But true or not, the story could save his job, and if true, it might even make his career. The Sallies present us with a unique opportunity to find solutions to problems, she said. Any problem. So let me ask you, Corey, what would you have them solve next if you could? He paused, pondering the question, and thought of his father's painful coughing fits as the tumor spread, his own ordeal with bone marrow transplants and radiation and chemotherapy. Cancer, he said, a cure for cancer. Great minds think alike, she said. And I'll stop there.
Thank you so much. I highly recommend you all seek out the podcast and hear the end of that story. It was so wonderful to hear all 4 of your stories. Really fun to revisit pieces from the magazine's past that I hadn't heard in such a long time. And then also fun to have a story each from the new Analog and Asimov's issues that come out today. So thank you so much for that. we have some questions, some time for questions. Yes?
Sarah, I'm very interested in Jewish women and science fiction. And I cannot tell you how much I loved your story and how it was infused with Jewish culture, like the bubbies and the kasha. And it strikes me that it relates to the Pygmalion myth in that a man is making a woman. But in the Pygmalion myth, when the men make the women, they do not take them apart and put them back together again. This is a new iteration of that myth. So my question is, are you trying to remake the Pygmalion myth in a way that celebrates the survival of Jewish women and their resilience?
Let's say yes. I love that take on it. I was thinking a little bit of Pygmalion, a little bit of Frankenstein, and also I think at the time that I wrote this, I was also inspired by Charles Tan's book Arrival, which, if you haven't read it, is incredible. He's an Australian artist, and it's a wordless. It's a wordless book. I'm not going to call it a comic, but it's a book about immigration and his parents' immigration to Australia, and because of the he wanted to convey the strangeness of arriving in a land where you just know nothing, and so he did that by replacing every known thing to them with something else. So the man in his story arrives and is handed a piece of fruit, but it's got like tentacles, and he meets an animal, and the animal is nothing like a dog or a cat, but clearly it's meant to be a pet, and just every single thing is reinterpreted and recontextualized. So I feel like a lot of things go into the mix, but I love your take on it also, and yeah, I think I was just thinking about the resilience of generations that and there's still, it's ongoing, but people who have to get up and figure out their lives over again. So thank you.
Thank you.
Go ahead.
Yeah, for Ms. Hoefler, was Robert Heinlein's I Will Fear No Evil an influence on you? In Heinlein's biography, he wrote that the donor body on alternate days as a white woman and as a black woman, and that was sort of an interesting echo in your story.
I have not read that.
Okay, it's his worst book, but
Okay, yeah. No, but I think for my story, it was a combination of two things. I cannot remember her name. I feel so bad. There's a poet who wrote this poem about. She goes by the cyborg, but I forget her real name. But she wrote this poem about police officer calling daughter's parents to come pick up their old daughter to get her new to go pick out a new body for her because their old daughter had been killed. So that's part of it. Again, part of it is what I said in the beginning, where I was always fearful that I would wake up one day, my parents and my husband would not recognize me. And then the third thing, what's the third thing? I'm really obsessed with gun violence in America. And I keep thinking, I said, man, like we're gonna do everything we can to keep guns running around in the streets and have shootings happen instead of just trying to fix the problem. And so it gets to the point where we're just changing bodies. So I kind of combine those all together, changing bodies, because we're just gonna be having gun violence keep paying people to have it continue. So it's kind of I guess three combinations of how it originated.
Actually, my question was also for you. That was so beautiful. I was just wondering, and I don't know if this is answerable, but I really was struck by the ending. Could you say a little bit more, if you don't mind, about how you chose to end that was the ending of the test, right?
Yeah.
A little bit more about that.
Yeah. Originally, I considered ending with the husband and her and the husband coming to some type of reconciliation. But I wrote this story also in the midst of the country being very polarized, and also us coming out of the pandemic. And I was thinking about how much a human touch means, right? Even if it's someone who looks nothing like you, someone you don't know, how much it means to just touch. We've been walking around for a long time, meeting people like, hey, like our mask on. And so I decided, even had it was like one of those stories I had a friend read who was like, oh, I don't know, this is kind of weird and creepy, but I was like, no, but I really, something about that human touch really, at the time I wrote it, really meant a lot to me. So that's why I shared it there.
I have a question to all of you. Did you try to play with the artificial intelligence, like the author of your novels? Did you try to play?
In the actual writing?
No, to play. Did you try?
Play with what?
Are you asking if they have tried to use the generative AI to help write, or if they've tried to write about artificial intelligence?
To try, yes. To write something, to play.
Okay, maybe those are two questions that I had written down too, so maybe we'll try to take both of them. As creatives, how do you feel about implementing AI as in the writing? And then also, how do you feel when you write an AI character? What does that look like, and is it different from how you write other peoples, be they human peoples or alien peoples? And yeah, any and all can answer.
The question about do you try to use artificial intelligence to generate?
Right, yeah, that's definitely the first half, yeah.
Scientists, because
Yeah. Well, I'll start with the first part of it though, which is the writing about artificial intelligence. I mean, it's a common science fiction trope that dates back as far as I can remember. You think about HAL in 2001: Space Odyssey. But it was funny because when I was asked the question, I didn't think that I had relied on that trope as often as I do. A lot of my stories have AI in them, even if it's not about AI. It's kind of peripheral in the background. AI is used. In this story, Beyond the Tattered Veil of Stars, it's funny that they're using AI in a different sense to kind of solve world problems, and that as the story progresses, you get more into the point of view of the AI characters who are being experimented on to find these solutions. So it's a minefield of interesting ideas when you deal with AI, and I think that if you're writing science fiction, it's almost inevitable you'll eventually touch upon it. In terms of the second question, using AI as a tool to generate fiction, I have strong feelings about this, and I'm very much opposed to it. I think that, just from a philosophical point of view, the whole point of, in my mind, of being able to have an AI tool is to free us up from mundane tasks, from, have AI do your chores. so you have time to do the arts, and to draw, to paint, and to be able to sit down and write fiction. The idea that you would instead use AI to do that instead, it's sort of, to me, it's tragic almost to use it for that purpose. That's my opinion, but I will pass it along to Mr. Kressel.
I have very similar opinions on that, but going back to the question about science fiction and AI, you could trace a line back through HAL in 2001, back to Frankenstein, Mary Shelley's Frankenstein, back to the Golem of Prague. There's a long history of creating artificial intelligences that, if you notice the trope, it's like they always end up rebelling, right? Terminator, right? Skynet. It's a common trope. I've written about it quite a bit in terms of how AI might replace jobs, and then what do you do when all the jobs that you, a lot of you guys are in studying for degrees now. What happens if you graduate and AI has replaced that job that you just spent 4 years and a lot of money for? What do you do then? These are some of the things that go through my mind. Or I've written stories about, if we have AI automating everything, what happens when it starts making decisions that are really, really bad for us and we don't agree with, but everyone's so accustomed to letting the machines do the decision for us? There's a story written, I believe it was in 1909, called The Machine Stops by E.M. Forrester. I recommend you all read that because it's extremely prescient about what's going on today. So in terms of like my beliefs about using AI in fiction, like actually generative AI, I strongly agree with David. I am against it. I think that there's a case to be made, and I know it's a gray area, but there's a case to be made that human beings are really the only species that create art. I mean, you might say some animals can, I'm not sure. It seems to me really, really weird that this is something that we would give up. The first thing when we have this machine that can seemingly do automated tasks, the first thing that we would choose to hand over to them is our creative capacity. I feel like that is a really dangerous thing, but it also diminishes, I think, what makes us essentially human. I think, and I can get into this a little bit more, but I think there's been a devaluing of arts in general. I think the focus has been on STEM, but not STEAM. There's no arts in there. STEAM, arts and humanities. I feel like there's not enough of that. There's not enough of focus on that. And then we're by focusing only on the technology, we're losing a human aspect. So I think it's really, really dangerous to hand over that creative capacity to software.
Okay, hope I don't be in there, but I probably will be in there because it's not my brain works. So with the question of using AI AI in my stories, I think when myself personally, when I do it as like a human or human-like creature, I do terribly. But I do, in a way, kind of use AI for like other aspects in the story. So I guess like in a way, kind of like it's embedded in the technology. But I have found that I need to work on. I'm not good at. I need to work on making AI not necessarily human-like, but playing with different options I have for making AI characters. So that is still a work in progress for me. And I probably also in agreement about using generative AI for writing. I have tried to plug in different prompts, right? I play with it, I teach writing. I, for the most part, still have been able to catch, and I don't try to catch my students on purpose when they use it, but there's something that you're reading, you're like, what is happening? And it's like there's something that's like flat about it, and there's something sometimes that doesn't make sense. And then sometimes I don't want to say like, oh, this is AI, but I'm like, there's something. So I always have a conversation with my student. There's something weird about what's happening in your paper. But myself personally, I've gone and plugged in like my story ideas and plugged in prompts, and I tried different prompts for stories I was working on. For example, I'm still working on a story about a clairvoyant Muslim girl who can like see deaths in the future of some of the people that she touches. Not everyone, she's still trying to figure it out. So I'm still working on that story, but I tried to plug like different versions of that prompt into ChatGPT. And it gave me the most stereotypical, like inner city, I'm from Newark, so I write a lot about Newark, inner city girl. And the interesting things, the things it did with religion, right? In terms of like, I was raised in a Black African-American Muslim household, Sunni Muslim household. And it was just pulling from different aspects of the religion that would never make sense for a character. This makes absolutely no sense. And so I think, I always say things are not impossible. But at this point, it was like fun to play with it. I use ChatGPT sometimes to create sonnets in the voice of Cardi B just for fun. But at this point, it plays no role in my writing whatsoever. Just plays no role. Because I have fun writing the sentences. I have fun playing with it. I have fun experimenting. Writing, like once you start finished writing, yay, but at the same time, I have fun writing draft after draft, trying to figure out how to fix it, that's like joyful for me. And I wish AI could clean my house.
Yes.
I wish it could go grocery shopping. I wish it could look in my refrigerator and say, this is what you have, don't go out. You can actually make a recipe out of this. Like this is what I want AI to do. I want AI to like tell me how to prioritize my life. Right? In a way, kind of like, do this first. This is actually important. Just do tomorrow, right? But as far as writing, I love it too much to hand it over to the machine.
That's pretty much my answer too. It's funny that I read a story that has sort of a positive spin on it because I am the most careful person around when it comes to those things, and a lot of my science fiction is the don't go there type. I find it very easy to access stories that are like if I'm trying to write something that's near future, and this is for the writers in the room, one thing you can do is you can ask, there's 3 questions you can ask. Who will this help? Who will this hurt? And who will profit? Help and profit being 2 slightly different things. And there's types of AI that are definitely helpful. There's the cancer detection as an example. And I have a friend who's quadriplegic who lives in an apartment that's every aspect is smartified and allows him to live on his own. Because there's something that can open his door, and so there's so many innovations that are good things, and then as has been said, like we are for some reason going after art instead, and which is the thing that I least think it's useful for. I'm one of the people who believes that we should actually be calling it like it is when it comes to generative. It's not intelligent. It's a plagiarism engine, and it's been fed lots of other people's stories, and it's turning out the lowest common denominator. It's turning out the cliches because that's what it's seen over and over. The stuff that it's seen the most is not elevating anything. So have I played with it? I actually haven't at all. I did try to write a story with Janelle Shane once, who wrote a great book about AI. We had this idea for a story that we never actually, that was going to integrate it at one crucial point, but we never finished that story. But for me, it's the joy of writing is that thing that your brain can do where these people who aren't you come out of your head, and these ideas that are somehow more than you get synthesized, and same with visual art. I just can't imagine that anything that can be that's being churned out by machines trained on other art can ever do something truly new. And I'm not interested in seeing it because I'm interested in stories told by people. So.
Thank you.
Thank you. We have 1 minute, and I know we have a question over here. Yes.
First of all, very quickly, I'm always happy to see fiction about space elevators, so, I had a slightly similar question in that, as someone who, I'm sort of in the middle of the querying process, I'm trying to break into fiction, and I'm wondering how your experiences have been in terms of the publishing industry's kind of, or publishers' reactions to sort of how AI, is used or could be used, and anything you might have run into in that regard.
I can say one thing quick. The question was about how publishing was reacting to this. There's been a lot of back and forth in contracts recently, like trying to figure out what language should be in, especially just the boilerplate contracts that go back and forth between artists and agents or writers and agents and artists and publishers. But part of the question is the question of whether they can train on your book, and whether they can use an AI cover, those are some of the things that I've seen come through contracts that you can still X out, and you can still fight that language and find ways. Some publishers are embracing it and some are pushing it away, and there's still room to argue within contracts is what I've seen.
Yeah, I can add from another angle is I know that certain online publications have been targeted by AI stories. Clark's World was inundated initially with just hundreds and hundreds of submissions every day of AI-generated stories that were, I guess, not very good, easily detectable. And as a result, I know that he's put in some protections. I don't know what they are. He's not saying so that people can't get around them. But I know that a lot of online sites now have language that says that it requires you to affirm that you have not used AI in your story to draft your story. And it's not something I think you want to take lightly. that if you might affirm that you haven't used AI when you have used AI, because it could have pretty severe repercussions. And the writing industry is very small, and everybody knows everybody. So if you do affirm that, make sure you have not used AI.
I can speak mostly to the short story market. I created a mock submission system. There's about 70 publishers now that use it. And most of them, I would say, are very strongly against it. And as David said, they ask you to, we created an affirmation that I did not use AI. And some of the publishers, it's up to them, but if they discover that you are lying, they will actually ban you, and then you can never submit to them again. I do think, as Sarah said, that it is a plagiarism device, that if you pass off something as your own that was written by a machine, then you are plagiarizing, it's not your work. So at least in the short story arena, in speculative fiction, which is what I'm most familiar with, there is a strongly anti-generative AI in terms of fiction. As others have said, there's other uses for AI that we are not necessarily against, or maybe we can. I do know that there was one publisher recently, and I'm blanking on which one it was, that asked authors that already had books if they could, they will pay them like $5,000 if they could use their books to train AI systems, and it was opt-in for the authors. So there was a lot of pushback against that. So I think that there's a lot of dramatic change going on right now in the industry and a lot of discussion about it. But from my point of view, most authors are very resistant towards it.
On the editorial side, I can say that Asimov's and Analog do not accept anything written with generative AI. We also consider it plagiarism based on all of the stories and novels that were stolen to train the AI. That's like, I mean, it's plagiarism on all accounts, but like for us, that's a huge part of it because no one's permission was received for that. And we don't use any AI in our work either. It's no generative AI space. And I feel that a lot of that, like Matt said, most of the short science fiction, speculative fiction, fantasy markets are on board with that. We went over, I'm sorry, Jason, but thanks so much for having us here. We always love to be part of this wonderful day. It's been so fun hearing everyone's papers and panels. Thank you.